So, Diana, of all the things that could have engaged your curious mind, what attracted you to church history?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've I've always been fascinated by history as long as I can remember. The first books I ever checked out of the library were about ancient Greece and Rome and ancient Mayan and Mexican civilizations. So while other kids were checking out books about Nancy Drew, I was reading about Caesar, which is kind of a strange thing, I guess, for a kid. So I've always loved history. And when I was a teenager, I had a very serious, what I would call conversion experience or commitment experience, where faith became really the center of my life. And when I figured out that you could put history and faith together and study religion, it just made sense to me. So I remember when I went off to college, and one of the required classes at the Christian college that I attended was church history. And I walked into class, heard this lecture on the first day, and I loved it. I knew that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I ran back to my dorm, and this gives you an idea of how long ago I went to college. But I ran back to my dorm. I grabbed the payphone, stuck the quarter in, called my mom, and I said, "Mom, I know what I want to major in." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "I want to grow up and be a church historian." There was this like dead silence on the other end of the phone, and my mother said, "You're kidding me." And she wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor or something that made money. So I wound up being a church historian because I love it. I've always been interested in the past. I've always been interested in faith. I've always been interested in how people gather and what people do with their lives in terms of making meaning and changing the world. So religious history just made a lot of sense. And I think one of the things I've learned from it over these long years is that understanding the past really helps you live well towards the future. So those are the passions that animate my work.
In your studies and your interviews and your reading and conversations and travels, are you optimistic about the future of the church, about the future of faith in our country?
Well, I'm not terribly optimistic about institutional religion. The ways in which we have organized and structured faith for the last century or so, those are disappearing. And the more we think about church as bureaucracies or businesses or corporations, all of that is changing in a state of flux. In a very real way, the church has been structured like General Motors. And we all know what's happened to General Motors over the last decade is that they had to be completely taken apart in order to be put back together again. And I think that organized religion is in much that same moment, is the old can no longer function and something new still has to be born. So we're in that moment of transition. And I do think that in moments like that, it is important to separate structure or form from the thing in and of itself. And it's a real mistake for people to think the way we've structured faith is equivalent to Christianity or equivalent to having a lively life of faith. So there's a certain amount of realism or pessimism that I have about structure, but I feel like I'm very optimistic about the thing itself. And the reason I'm optimistic about the thing itself is because at its heart, Christianity is about a living relationship with God through Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit. That's a pretty good thing to bet on. And it is also about being able to live a life where we love God and love our neighbors as ourselves. And I think that when it comes to both of those sides of the equation, about the nature of God and God's passion and involvement in our lives through and with Christ, I can't help but be optimistic about that. And I also can't help but be optimistic about the vision of a world based in the love of God and love of neighbor, because that to me seems like what we need most in the early part of the 21st century. And I think that even people who are outside of Christian faith and outside of the church see that, and they see it in varieties of new and exciting ways, and they see it through the lenses of their own faith traditions. And I think that the more we can talk about that, the more we can live it, the more we can be together with one another, even with our differences, in loving God and loving our neighbor, the better the world is going to be. So faith actually provides a pathway for a better future if we can see it not as an institution to be guarded, but rather as a set of practices and a vision to be lived.
So Diana, I know why we pursued you, and we're excited about you coming to the Diocese of North Carolina. What attracted you to us?
Oh, I love North Carolina. It's a funny sort of thing when you come to a new place. I moved here after seminary and after college, and I had mostly lived on the West Coast, and I wasn't really thinking about I went to Duke. I wasn't really thinking about moving to North Carolina. I had a scholarship opportunity at Yale, but I came down here in the spring of 1987, and the person who was trying to woo me to come to Duke took me to the beautiful Duke Gardens, and it was such a lovely day, and the people were so friendly, and I know it's going to be hard for Chapel Hill and North Carolina fans to imagine this, but the Duke students were wonderful. They were friendly, and they were nice, and it was just a communal atmosphere of study and being in graduate school rather than a really competitive sort of dog-eat-dog one. And so I came here, and I really liked living here the 4 years I was in North Carolina, and came to appreciate the graciousness of the place and the beauty of it, and that it's a different kind of part of the South. I don't think people who are from outside of the South understand that each one of these states has sort of different personalities. And North Carolina I appreciate because there's always been a progressive kind of edge to North Carolina, a willingness to sort of step outside of the rest of the South and to hold up its values about equality and justice. I remember reading that North Carolina wasn't really crazy about the idea of leaving the Union. It sort of got pressured into it by the people on either side. And so I appreciate life here. It gives me a real passion for this place, and that the church would do well here, because I trust the Diocese of North Carolina to be able to take risky moves to make the future happen, because this diocese has done it before in the past, and I know it can do it helping Episcopalians into the future.
Thank you, Diana.